All that was left of her memory were a few useless fragments, but she clung to them as though they were precious diamonds, reciting them like sacred prayers. "My name starts with a J," she whispered. Sometimes she entertained possibilities. Maybe her name had been Jane, Jen, Jessica, or Jennifer. Usually she just focused on the J, because that fragment was authentic and anchored in her humanity. When I was 16, I went to the prom with a dark-haired boy. He stumbled, and his glasses fell off and he stepped on them. The climactic moment of this memory was the clearest. The sounds of crunching plastic and glass, and the trembling frown of shame on the dark-haired boy's face. She felt a faint feeling of embarrassment for him, but the feeling was as faint and fleeting as the memory. Daddy taught me how to ride my bike. It was white with pink streamers on the handlebars. I crashed and scraped my knees and cried in my daddy's shirt. The blood on her scraped knees was bright in her memory, along with the way Daddy had hugged her so tightly as she cried into his blue and white plaid shirt. She repeated the descriptions of these memories over and over to herself. This was her means of preserving them, polishing them, worshipping them. They were her gods, and as long as she paid devotion to them, they would maintain part of her humanity. They would provide her with substance. The others did the same as her. Sitting with their backs against the wall, they recited what they remembered, whispering these memories like private little prayers to the gods of humanity. Surrounding all of them was a drab gray room, blank gray walls of bleak imprisonment. Fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed above their heads. All of them were dressed in identical gray gowns, gray sheets of cloth that covered their nakedness, labeling them as the prisoner, labeling them with shame and subordination. She recited her memories, rarely stopping to think about anything else. When she did stop, sometimes she wondered how she was able to speak. How did she know she was losing herself? How and why were certain aspects of her mind taken and others maintained? Such thoughts were futile, of course. No answers could be gleaned from them. Perhaps she really didn't want to know anyway. What if the truth was too hideous and awful to bear? One other memory still remained, and this one she dared not speak of. This one bound her tongue and numbed her lips as soon as it showed its presence in her mind's eye. It was not a memory that always lingered. Instead it cycled, fading like a setting sun to rise again later. When it did rise again, the sight of it caused such overwhelming awe, all of her mental attention was pulled toward it. It rose into her mind like a sun, an immense, bright, blood-red sun. It was their God through which their recited prayers had summoned, returning, rising again to take what they'd offered. The time of sacrifice was coming again. At that moment, the grandest memory of all surfaced in all their minds. The room went silent as their tongues were tied and their lips became numb. She saw it too, the red door at the end of the hall, the red door that glimmered like a fresh wound. Behind the red door their God awaited, prepared to take them and what they had to offer. That was when the hollow clang sounded of the steel door unlocking. The hinges creaked as the door opened. The man and woman walked inside. They were the presenters, the enlightened ones that presented them to the gods. The man was bald with narrow dark eyes like coffee granules and a sharp small nose. The woman had close-cropped blonde hair, blue eyes, and milky pale skin. She was almost as white as the robe she wore. The man and woman looked over all of them, and then made a choice, selecting a short little man who sat in the middle. The blonde woman pointed at him. He obeyed, getting to his feet, and then the man and woman in white robes escorted him out to the hall. The steel door was closed. The clang and click echoed through the spacious room as the door was locked. A few moments later, muffled screams came from the man out in the hall. They knew why. The girl whose name started with a J knew why. The thing, the god or gods, behind the red door was waiting for him, and it was hungry. Several hours passed. She continued reciting her memories, occasionally digressing to other thoughts, other tormenting unanswerable questions, to then revert back on track with what was of importance, reciting that which anchored her identity. Eventually, the fluorescent lights turned off. At this moment, she gradually became sleepy, as was the established routine after a long period of conditioning. She fell asleep. Trees, gnarled and frightening, loomed in the darkness. A forest engulfed her, as was the dream that took place in her mind each time she fell asleep. She was lost in the forest. Frantically, she ran through the underbrush and stirring fog, dodging each tree, as she fought her way to an opening, a clearing, an exit from this nightmare maze. She turned, ran, but found only darkness. She ran in another direction and a gnarled branch snagged her shirt. She ripped away and continued running, panting and moaning in terror and exhaustion. Finally, the dark fog and engulfing trees relented. A meadow opened to her, and amidst the meadow was a small pond, the starlit sky reflected in the still, mirror-like water. She hurried toward the pond and knelt before it. She gazed in awe and bewilderment at what she saw therein. An eye stared back at her, large and silver, like a bright moon. Images shone from the pupil, glimpses of shadows that were somehow familiar, yet she could not completely realize and understand them in concrete details. Mostly they were shadows, stirring and dancing before her eyes. Occasionally they glimmered, and these were the moments of familiarity, causing a feeling of brief clarity and fleeting nostalgia. Except one thing did concretize itself. One of the shadows became still. Slowly the shadow solidified, taking shape, becoming a human shape. The skeleton materialized, along with the organs, muscle and flesh, all in rapid progression. What she now saw reflected in the silver eye was herself, a beautiful woman with long brown hair, green eyes, and a healthy, trim body. It was her, and it spoke her name, Judith. The fog returned, descending over the pond. Trees and darkness engulfed her once more. Now she was lost again, running through the trees that strove to hold her back. But at least she had found a prize to take with her, a fragment of her identity, a piece of her humanity. She awoke suddenly, gasping. The room was still dark. She heard the serene breathing and snoring of the others sleeping. She felt pleasure at this moment, to have total privacy as she admired her new and precious artifact. Judith, she whispered in the darkness, smiling as she did. My name is Judith. She said her name slowly, savoring it like a tasty, fulfilling piece of fruit. Yes, life had been added to her. Now the skeleton had gained a bit of muscle, or perhaps a vessel if the pumping heart had been formed. My name is Judith, and I danced with the dark-haired boy when I was 16 at the prom. He stumbled and broke his glasses. My name is Judith. Daddy taught me how to ride my bike. It was a white bike with pink streamers on the handlebars. I crashed and scraped my knees. Daddy hugged me when I cried. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, and the others soon awoke and began the same process of reciting what they remembered. There had been times in the past when Judith attempted to talk to the others. Somehow, in her own mind at least, there remained an awareness of those around her. Every attempt led to no avail. The others merely gazed blankly at the far wall, speaking what they remembered as if a strict program guided their every function, and she supposed that wasn't too far from the truth. Life was a consistent routine that never varied. Judith realized that at some point she would be reduced to what they were, bags of flesh and bone, unaware of anything other than their own secluded vision. Why do I have this awareness? Judith wondered. Why have I not lost it yet? Again, it was another unanswerable question that would merely torment her. The man and woman in white certainly wouldn't give her an answer. They never spoke. The best she could surmise was that she hadn't undergone the process as long as the others. She listened to the others. The memories they spoke of were very threadbare, some of them hardly comprehensible. The red-haired man sitting next to her spoke of a white car and a yellow dog, and they were spoken of arbitrarily, without any context to hold them upright. Judith dreaded such a fate. She feared being reduced to such an empty state that living would no longer truly be living. It seemed such a fate awaited her, and her fellow sufferers seemed to be the example. Judith. She spoke the name again. She was happy because it was her name. It was the most prized fragment of all. The dream had enabled her to discover it. The eye in the middle of the pond. Why? She asked herself. Why weren't the others revitalized after they awoke? Of course, maybe they were, but she just didn't know it. A familiar sound echoed in the room. The click and clang of the steel door opening. The man and woman in white robes entered, carrying the man dressed in the gray between them. The man was disturbingly different. He slumped between them, limp and lifeless. His eyes were blank like two fogged mirrors. Worst of all, at least from Judith's perspective, the man only spoke two words over and over again. The eye. The eye. The eye. He spoke in a rasping, weak voice, as if speaking the words were slowly choking him. The man and woman dropped him to the floor. He collapsed as quickly and limply as a blanket. He merely laid there, twitching, drooling, and speaking those hideous words. The man and woman in white then walked over and grabbed the red-haired man sitting next to Judith. They picked him up, and he went without a fuss. The man wearing the white robe glanced at Judith before they left. He did so with a solemn stare that indicated she was next. Out the door they went. The door closed, locked, and soon Judith heard the muffled screams of the red-haired man. He sees the red door down the hallway, Judith thought, alarmed. I know he does, and he recognizes it. That must mean that the others aren't fully brain-dead. She tried to speak to them. Hey, she said. Hello? None of them responded. It was as if she wasn't even there. She forced herself to her feet. It had been a long time since she had stood up, and her legs felt weak and tingly. She hobbled as she walked over to the man lying on the floor. He stared through her, eyes glazed and blank. The eye. The eye. The eye. Judith turned to the others. Hey, she said. Can you hear me? Nobody responded. They only carried on reciting their incoherent prayers. Judith returned to her place against the wall, feeling helpless. There was nothing more she could do. All that was left for her were those small fragments of memory and one large fragment of awareness of herself and the others. Soon these fragments would be torn away from her. Judith gave in. All she had for comfort were those few remaining fragments as well. So she recited them, nurtured them, recited her sacred prayers. She was sure that she would be the next offering. Hours passed. The door did unlock and open again, and the red-haired man returned. He was not reduced to the same state as the man before him, but he did seem stiffer, quieter. Judith did not have long to observe him. The man and woman in white took her by the arms and pulled her to her feet. She tried to fight, but they were much too strong. All of her muscles stiffened and seized at the presence of their grip. She was brought out into the hall and the steel door closed behind her. Now she saw it. The memory was confirmed as a reality. The red door awaited her at the end of the hallway, grim and dreadful. The gods were behind it. The gods awaited their new sacrifice. No, she screamed. Please, no. We can't live this way. I want to live. Step by step, the red door got closer. The man and woman spoke not a word. They merely marched her along, stern and determined to fulfill their enlightened duty. The terror overwhelmed her mind. Would she remember nothing after this? Would she remember only the eye that raped her mind and destroyed her soul forever? The red door opened, and the bright light took her as she was pushed through.